Welcome to Who is Jesus? And over the next few weeks, we'll be looking together at Mark chapter 13. Now, Mark chapter 13 is where Jesus very clearly answers questions concerning the end times. And it's a subject that is very much in people's minds and hearts at this present time. This is episode 52, and I'm going to take Mark chapter 13 and basically break it up into 10-15 minute segments until we get through the whole chapter. In this time in our world, there is a pandemic. There is an infection, there's a virus that's racing through the world, the whole world. Very few places can honestly say they've not had any instances of it. And it causes people to stop and think, what's going on? Well, that happened in Jesus' time. And we're going to look at what Jesus' response is in Mark chapter 13. When Jesus was leaving the temple, one of his disciples said, "Teacher, look at these magnificent buildings. Look at the impressive stones in the walls." And Jesus said, "Yeah, they're great, but they will be completely demolished and no stone will be left on another." Jesus said that around us that looks solid and secure and safe can be removed in no time at all, even to the point where there's nothing left, just not one stone standing on top of another. And so Jesus then moves on to the Mount of Olives in verse 3 with his disciples, and particularly Peter, James and John and Andrew. And they come privately to him and they say, "When will this happen? And what sign will show that these things are about to be fulfilled?" And I'm going to look very quickly at the signs that Jesus gives from verse 5 through to verse 13. And I've listed them in the Who is Jesus booklet in a list. And we'll have a look at what Jesus said are going to be the signs of his return. Firstly, people will falsely claim to be the Christ, the Messiah, the Anointed One. And right through the ages, there are people who have claimed to be the Christ. Now, Christ is the Greek word for Messiah, the Hebrew word. And both Christ and Messiah actually mean the Anointed One. The one anointed by God to do the work of salvation. The one anointed by God to bring in the kingdom. The one anointed by God to be all that he has asked him to be. Now, as Christians, we believe Jesus Christ is the Messiah, the Anointed One. But there are many others, and even in today's day, we are still seeing people who say, "I'm the Christ." Particularly amongst New Age philosophies, yoga, Hinduism, even in Islam, they are looking for a Messiah. And the Jews are still awaiting the Messiah who has already come. The second thing Jesus said is, there will be wars and rumours of more wars. When we look around our world today, we see wars and we see possibilities of further conflict. Even as we speak, in Myanmar, there has been a coup, and there has been warnings from China if anyone tries to step in. The United Nations wanted to pass a resolution and China has blocked it. There's always this fringe element of what will happen next. Thirdly, Jesus said, nations will rise against nations, and ethnic uprisings within nations. How often in this 21st and the 20th century have we seen ethnic uprisings where one people group of a nation fights another people group of the same nation? The nations are in flux and fluid. There's disturbance in the nations. We're at present expecting, pandemic permitting, to have the G7 conference here on our doorstep in Cornwall, where nations gather together to try and solve the financial problems of the world. I wonder, will it happen, or will the pandemic stop it? Will it happen, or will some of the nations have fallen out with each other before it occurs? All these things are in a mix. Fourthly, Jesus said there will be a rise in earthquakes and famines and natural disasters. And we see that in our world today. There's earthquakes in unusual places, and there's large earthquakes along the usual fault lines. Again, there have been earthquakes through the centuries, and they continue. Tragically, famines also continue, and natural disasters. Fifthly, there'll be a rise in persecution of Jesus's followers. Now we see that physically in lots of nations in the Middle East, Africa, the Asian continent, where Christians are persecuted physically for their faith. But we are beginning in the West to see Christians persecuted for their faith, not physically as yet, but certainly in the workplace. No longer can a Christian clearly state what they believe and remain in their job in some areas. And so that we're seeing that rise in persecution of those who follow the teachings of the Bible and the Christian faith. Now we get to verse 10 in Mark chapter 13, and this to me is a pivotal verse. You see, the others, Jesus says, are signs of his coming, and we've seen them right through the ages. They're continuing. So we're not saying Jesus has already been, because the signs are continuing. But when we get to verse 10, there is a sign which will herald the ultimate end of the age. Verse 10, Mark 13, the good news must first be preached to all nations. This is the final sign when all nations have heard the good news. And Matthew's gospel says, and then the end shall come. Now you and I don't know which nations have not yet heard the news. And you might think, well, we need to send missionaries to the darkest corners of the earth. How you get corners in a round world, but there we go. Darkest corners of the earth, and tell them the good news. I tell you, you or I in the West could be the ones who are the last or first to speak to a certain people group who've never yet heard the gospel. Because walking down our streets, not at this present time, but generally speaking, are people from every nation of the world. And we could be the ones that speak to the people group who have yet to hear. And at that point, God will call time. Thank you for listening to this first part of Mark chapter 13, and we'll continue the next time. God bless you.